The afternoon sun was slanting through the glass facade of the Carter Technologies building in Boston's Seaport District when Evelyn Carter pushed through the revolving door at 2:30 on a Thursday in October 2025, carrying a canvas tote bag filled with homemade sweet potato pie and collard greens packed in Tupperware containers that still radiated warmth. She was 72 years old, dressed in what she considered her nice clothes, a floral print dress she had bought from Macy's on sale, a cardigan sweater that had belonged to her late husband, sensible shoes from Payless, and a church hat that she wore on special occasions because she believed in looking presentable when you went somewhere important. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a neat bun, and her face carried the lines of a life lived through segregation and civil rights and decades of work as a home health aide caring for elderly white people in the suburbs of Boston. She had raised 4 children on that salary, had put 3 of them through college with a combination of loans and shifts that sometimes stretched past midnight, and had helped raise 7 grandchildren, including Andre, her eldest daughter's son, the one who had always been brilliant, driven, determined to build something that would change the world. Andre had done exactly that. At 35, he was the founder and CEO of Carter Technologies, a company that had revolutionized supply chain management through artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that was now valued at $12 billion. He employed over 3,000 people across offices in Boston, San Francisco, London, and Singapore, and he had been featured on the cover of Forbes and Time and Bloomberg Businessweek. He was one of the youngest black billionaires in the country, and Evelyn was prouder of him than she had words to express, though she tried every Sunday when he came to her apartment in Dorchester for dinner to tell him that his success had not changed who he was, that he was still the boy who had spent summers helping her in the garden, who had read to her from the newspaper when her eyes got tired, who had promised her when he was 15 that he would take care of her when he made it big. Today was Andre's birthday, his 35th, and Evelyn had baked his favorite pie and made the collard greens the way he liked them, with smoked turkey and a touch of vinegar, and she had taken 2 buses from Dorchester to the seaport because she wanted to surprise him, wanted to see the look on his face when she showed up unannounced with food from home. She had been to his office once before, 2 years ago, when the company moved into the new building, a gleaming 15-story tower with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby that looked like something from a magazine, all polished marble and modern art, and a reception desk that curved like a wave. Andre had given her a tour, introduced her to his team, showed her his office on the 14th floor with its view of the harbor, and she had felt such a swell of pride and joy that she had cried a little, though she tried to hide it because she did not want to embarrass him. But that visit had been planned, announced, with Andre waiting for her in the lobby. This time, she was surprising him, and as she approached the reception desk where 2 young white women sat behind glowing computer screens, she felt a flutter of nervousness, wondering if this was a mistake, if she should have called first. But it was too late to turn back now, and besides, she had come all this way and the pie was still warm, and she wanted to see her grandson. The receptionist on the left, a woman in her mid-20s with blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and wearing a headset, looked up as Evelyn approached, and her expression shifted in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. A flicker of assessment that took in Evelyn's floral dress and her cardigan and her church hat and the tote bag she was carrying, and reached a conclusion in the space of a heartbeat. The receptionist's smile, which had been bright and professional for the white man in a suit who had just walked past, dimmed into something polite but distant, the smile you gave to someone you were about to redirect. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, and there was a note in her voice that Evelyn recognized from a lifetime of encounters. The note that said, "You don't belong here. You must be lost. You must be here for some reason that has nothing to do with being a visitor or a guest or someone with legitimate business." Evelyn set the tote bag down on the marble floor, careful not to let it tip, and said, Yes, I'm here to see Andre Carter. I'm his grandmother. The receptionist's expression did not change, but something in her eyes hardened, a skepticism that was barely veiled. She glanced at the other receptionist, a meaningful look that Evelyn could not quite interpret, and then turned back to Evelyn. I'm sorry, but Mr. Carter is in meetings all afternoon and isn't available for walk-ins. If you'd like to schedule an appointment, you can email his assistant, and someone will get back to you. Evelyn felt the first stirrings of something uncomfortable, a tightness in her chest. I don't need an appointment. I'm his grandmother. I just want to bring him some food for his birthday. Can you just call up and let him know I'm here? The receptionist's smile became even tighter, and she said in the tone you used with someone who was being difficult, "Ma'am, I understand, but we have policies about visitors. Mr. Carter is a very busy man, and we can't just interrupt his schedule for unannounced visits. If you're family, I'm sure you have his personal number and can reach him directly." Evelyn did have his personal number, of course, but she had wanted to surprise him, and now this young woman was making her feel like she was being unreasonable, like she was causing a problem. "I do have his number," Evelyn said, "but I wanted to surprise him. It's his birthday. Can you please just call his office and tell him his grandmother is here?" The receptionist sighed, a small sound of exasperation, and then said, "Ma'am, if you're here to deliver something, the cleaning staff and delivery people use the back entrance. You can take the elevator down to the basement level, follow the signs to the loading dock, and check in with security there. They'll direct you to where you need to go." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment Evelyn could not process what she was hearing. Cleaning staff, the back entrance. The assumption was so clear, so absolute, that this white woman behind the desk had looked at Evelyn, at her age and her clothes and her skin, and had decided that she could not possibly be there to visit the CEO, that she must be there to clean or to deliver something, that she belonged in the basement with the service workers, not in the gleaming lobby with its marble and its art, and its illusion of being a place where everyone was welcome. If you are reading this and thinking about the ways that dignity is granted or denied based on assumptions about who people are, about how class and race and age intersect to render some people invisible while others are seen and celebrated, then you understand why Evelyn Carter stood in that lobby feeling a shame and an anger that were both familiar and devastating. This is a story about what happens when those assumptions are challenged, about the institutions that perpetuate them, and about the cost of demanding that people see you as fully human, as deserving of respect, as someone's grandmother rather than someone's maid. Evelyn felt her face flush with heat, felt the anger and the humiliation warring inside her, and she wanted to say something sharp, something that would make this young woman understand what she had just done. But the words stuck in her throat, years of training and conditioning telling her not to make a scene, not to be difficult, not to give anyone a reason to call her angry or aggressive or out of control. So instead she said, voice trembling slightly, "I am not cleaning staff. I'm not here to deliver something. I am Andre Carter's grandmother, and I'm here to see my grandson. Now, are you going to call his office, or do I need to go up there myself?" The receptionist's expression shifted again, this time to something more defensive, more guarded. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down. If you're not listed as a pre-approved visitor and you don't have an appointment, I can't let you go up. Those are the rules. Now, if you'd like to call Mr. Carter yourself and have him come down, that's fine. But I can't just send you up because you claim to be his grandmother." Claim. The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow. This woman did not believe her. This woman thought she was lying, thought she was trying to scam her way into the building, thought that the idea of Andre Carter having a black grandmother in a floral dress and a church hat was so implausible that it could not possibly be true. Evelyn reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, an old model that Andre had given her years ago and that she barely knew how to use, and she tried to navigate to her contacts to find Andre's number, but her hands were shaking and her eyes were blurring with tears. She refused to let fall, and it took her several attempts to find his name and press the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Evelyn prayed that he would answer, that he would not be in a meeting or on another call, that he would pick up and she could tell him what was happening and he could come down and fix this, make this woman understand. But the call went to voicemail. Andre's voice cheerful and professional, saying he was unavailable and to leave a message, and Evelyn felt the hope drain out of her. She lowered the phone, looked at the receptionist and said, her voice quiet now, defeated, "He didn't answer. But I am telling you the truth. I am his grandmother. My name is Evelyn Carter. I raised him. I am here to bring him food for his birthday. Please, just check with someone. Ask his assistant. She'll know who I am." The receptionist stared at her for a long moment, and Evelyn could see the calculation happening, the weighing of whether this old black woman was telling the truth or whether she was a problem that needed to be removed. Finally, the receptionist said, "I'll call up to his assistant, but if you're not on the approved visitor list, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She picked up the phone, dialed an extension, and spoke in a low voice that Evelyn could not quite hear. The conversation lasted less than a minute, and when the receptionist hung up, her face was pale, her expression one of shock and something that might have been fear. She looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in her eyes. A dawning realization that she had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. "Mrs. Carter," she said, and the title was offered like a belated apology. "Mr. Carter's assistant says to send you right up. I'm so sorry for the confusion. If you'll just take the elevator to the 14th floor, someone will meet you there." Evelyn stared at her, felt the anger surge again, sharper now that the receptionist's tone had changed, now that she was being treated with the deference that should have been offered from the beginning. "Confusion," Evelyn repeated, her voice cold. "That's what you're calling it? You told me to use the back entrance. You assumed I was cleaning staff. You didn't believe me when I told you who I was. That's not confusion, that's disrespect." The receptionist's face flushed red, and she stammered, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carter. I didn't mean, we have protocols, and I was following them. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Evelyn said. "You looked at me, and you decided what I was, and you treated me accordingly. And now that you know who I am, now that you know my grandson owns this building, you're sorry. But what about all the people who come through here who don't have a grandson who's a billionaire? What about the cleaning staff, the delivery people? Do they deserve to be treated like they're not even human?" The receptionist did not have an answer, and Evelyn did not wait for one. She picked up her tote bag, turned toward the elevators, and walked across the marble floor with her head high and her shoulders back, even though her hands were still shaking and her heart was pounding, and she felt the weight of every assumption, every dismissal, every moment in her 72 years when she had been made to feel small and invisible and less than. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, and when the doors opened, Andre's assistant, a young black woman named Jasmine, who had met Evelyn before and who always greeted her warmly, was waiting with a wide smile that faltered when she saw Evelyn's face. "Mrs. Carter, are you okay?" Jasmine asked, concern evident in her voice. The receptionist called up, sounding really weird, like something had happened. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn tried to smile, tried to reassure her, but the emotion was too close to the surface, and instead she said, voice breaking slightly, "Is Andre available? I need to see him." Jasmine's expression shifted to alarm, and she said, "He's in a meeting, but I can interrupt him. Come with me." She led Evelyn down a hallway lined with offices and conference rooms, past employees who glanced up from their desks and computers, and to a corner office with Andre's name on the door. Jasmine knocked, opened the door without waiting for a response, and said, "Andre, your grandmother is here. I think something's wrong." Andre was sitting at a conference table with 3 other people, all of them mid-discussion. But the moment he saw Evelyn, he was on his feet, crossing the room to her, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Grandma? What are you doing here? Are you okay? Is something wrong?" Evelyn set the tote bag down, and the floodgates opened, the tears she had been holding back spilling over, and she said, voice choked with emotion, "I came to surprise you for your birthday. I made you pie and collard greens, but when I got downstairs, the woman at the desk, she told me to use the back door. She thought I was cleaning staff. She didn't believe me when I said I was your grandmother." Andre's expression went from concern to shock, to a cold, controlled fury that Evelyn had only seen a few times in his life, usually when someone had wronged her or his mother or someone he loved. He put his arms around her, held her for a moment, and then said, "I'm so sorry, Grandma. That should never have happened, never. I'm going to fix this." He turned to the people at the conference table, all of whom were staring with expressions of discomfort and surprise, and said, "We'll have to reschedule. Something's come up that I need to deal with immediately." Then he turned to Jasmine and said, "Call security. I want to know who was working the front desk this afternoon, and get HR on the phone. We need to have a conversation about what just happened." Jasmine nodded, already pulling out her phone, and Andre guided Evelyn to the couch in his office, sat beside her and said, "Tell me exactly what happened. Everything." Evelyn recounted the encounter, her voice steadier now, and as she spoke, she could see Andre's jaw tightening, his hands clenching into fists, the anger radiating off him in waves. When she finished, he said, "That receptionist is going to be fired, and we're going to review every policy, every protocol, every single thing about how visitors are treated. Because if this happened to you, it's happening to other people, and that's unacceptable." Evelyn reached out, put her hand on his arm. "Andre, I don't want someone to lose their job because of me. I just want them to understand. I want them to see that they were wrong." Andre looked at her, and his expression was firm, unyielding. "Grandma, this isn't about you asking for anything. This is about the fact that someone who works for my company treated you with disrespect and contempt because of how you look, because of assumptions they made. That's discrimination, and it's not something I'm going to tolerate. I built this company on values, and one of those values is that everyone is treated with dignity. If we're not living that, then we're failing." Evelyn nodded, felt the relief of being believed, of having someone fight for her, but she also felt the weight of what was about to happen, the knowledge that this incident was going to become something larger, something that would ripple out beyond this office and this building. Over the next hour, Andre moved with the precision and focus that had made him a successful entrepreneur. He called the head of security, confirmed that the receptionist's name was Emily Thompson, and requested footage from the lobby cameras. He called the head of HR, a woman named Patricia Simmons, and asked her to come to his office immediately. And he called his chief operating officer, a man named David Huang, who had been with the company since its early days, and briefed him on what had happened. When Patricia arrived, Andre did not waste time with pleasantries. He recounted what Evelyn had told him, his voice tight with controlled anger, and then said, "I want Emily Thompson placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation. I want to review our visitor policies and our training for front desk staff, and I want to understand how something like this could happen in my company, in a building that I own, to my grandmother." Patricia, a black woman in her 50s who had worked in HR for over 30 years, listened with a grave expression, taking notes. And when Andre finished, she said, "I'm so sorry this happened, Mrs. Carter. This is completely unacceptable. I'll start the investigation right away, and I'll make sure we get to the bottom of what happened and why." Andre nodded. "I also want to talk to Emily Thompson directly. I want to hear from her what she was thinking, what made her assume my grandmother was cleaning staff." Patricia hesitated. "Andre, I understand you're upset, but it might be better to let HR handle the investigation. Having you directly involved could complicate things legally." I don't care about complications, Andre said. This is personal. This is my grandmother. And I want to understand how someone I employ, someone who represents my company, could treat another human being that way. Patricia did not argue further. She said she would arrange a meeting, and she left to begin the process. Andre turned back to Evelyn, who had been sitting quietly, processing everything, and he said, "Grandma, I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone. I promise." Evelyn looked at her grandson, at the man he had become, and she felt the pride surge again, mixed with a sadness that he had to fight this battle, that the world they lived in required him to use his power and his platform to demand basic respect for his own grandmother. "I know you will, baby," she said. "I know you will. If you have been following Evelyn's experience, if you have felt the sting of being dismissed and disrespected based on assumptions about who you are, then you understand that this story is about more than one incident in one lobby. It is about the ways that service workers and elderly people and black women are rendered invisible, about the systems that teach us to see some people as deserving of dignity and others as background noise, and about what happens when someone with power decides that those systems need to change. And if this resonates with you, if you see yourself or your loved ones in this story, then share it, talk about it, let it be part of the larger conversation about respect and humanity in all the spaces we occupy. The meeting with Emily Thompson took place 2 days later in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Carter Technologies building. Andre insisted on being present, despite Patricia's continued concerns about legal exposure, and Evelyn asked to attend as well, saying she wanted to hear what the young woman had to say, wanted to understand. Patricia arranged for a witness from the legal team to be present, a young attorney named Michael Rodriguez, and the 5 of them sat around the conference table in a silence that was heavy with tension. Emily Thompson arrived, looking pale and nervous, her eyes red-rimmed as though she had been crying, and she sat in the chair that Patricia indicated, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the table. She was younger than Evelyn had remembered, probably mid-20s, and there was a fragility to her now that had not been present in the lobby, a sense that she understood the gravity of the situation and was terrified of the consequences. Andre spoke first, his voice calm but cold. "Ms. Thompson, I'm Andre Carter. This is my grandmother, Evelyn Carter, who you met on Thursday when she came to visit me. I want to understand what happened that day, and I want to hear from you directly why you assumed my grandmother was cleaning staff and directed her to use the back entrance." Emily looked up, her eyes darting to Evelyn and then away, unable to hold her gaze. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a terrible mistake. I didn't mean to offend your grandmother. I was just following the protocols we were taught, and I made an assumption, and I was wrong. I'm so sorry." "What protocols?" Andre asked, leaning forward slightly. "What were you taught that made you think it was appropriate to tell my grandmother to use the service entrance?" Emily's face flushed red, and she stammered, "We were told during training that if someone comes in who looks like they might be there for a service reason, like cleaning or delivery, we should direct them to the loading dock. It's for security, to make sure that everyone who's in the main areas of the building is authorized to be there. And I looked at your grandmother and I assumed, and I didn't ask enough questions, and I'm sorry." "You assumed based on what?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What about me made you think I was cleaning staff?" Emily looked at her, and tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know. You were carrying a bag, and you were dressed. I mean, you weren't dressed like the other visitors who come in, and I made a judgment, and it was wrong. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carter. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Evelyn repeated. "Your job is to make assumptions about people based on how they're dressed. Your job is to treat people differently depending on whether they look like they belong in the front of the building or the back." Emily was crying now openly, and she said, "No, that's not my job. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." Andre sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Thompson, I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand something. What you did to my grandmother wasn't just a mistake. It was an act of discrimination. You made assumptions about her based on her age, her race, and her appearance, and you treated her as less than, as someone who didn't deserve the same courtesy and respect you would give to a white person in a suit. And that tells me that either you personally hold those biases, or the training you received reinforced them, or both. Either way, it's unacceptable." He paused, let the words settle, and then continued, "I'm not going to fire you today, but you're going to be placed on a performance improvement plan, and you're going to undergo additional training on bias and discrimination. And if there's ever another incident like this, if you ever treat anyone the way you treated my grandmother, you will be terminated immediately. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I understand. And I promise I'll do better. I'll learn from this. I'm so sorry." Andre dismissed her, and after she left, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Patricia said, "Andre, I think the performance improvement plan is the right call. It gives her a chance to learn and grow, and it protects the company if we need to terminate her later." Andre nodded, but his expression was grim. "I don't care about protecting the company. I care about making sure this doesn't happen again. And that means we need to look at everything, Patricia. Who trained her? What are we teaching people about how to treat visitors? What policies do we have that might be reinforcing these biases without us even realizing it?" Patricia made notes, promised to conduct a full review, and the meeting adjourned. Evelyn and Andre walked back to his office together, and when they were alone, Andre said, "Grandma, I'm sorry you had to sit through that. I wanted you to hear her explanation, but I also wanted her to see you, to understand that you're not just some abstract concept. You're a real person, my grandmother, someone I love." Evelyn reached up, touched his cheek. "You did good, baby. You held her accountable, but you also gave her a chance to learn. That's more than a lot of people would do." Andre smiled, a tight, tired smile. "I learned that from you. You always taught me to be firm but fair, to stand up for what's right, but also to have compassion. I'm trying to live that." "You are," Evelyn said, "and I'm proud of you." Indeed, but as she said the words, she also felt the weight of what was still to come, the knowledge that one meeting with one receptionist was not going to solve the larger problem, that the assumptions Emily had made were not unique to her, but were reflections of broader patterns, broader systems that needed to be challenged and changed. Over the next several weeks, Andre and his leadership team conducted a comprehensive review of the company's visitor policies, training programs, and workplace culture. What they found was troubling. The protocols that Emily had referenced were indeed part of the training for front desk staff, and while they were framed as security measures, they included language about being vigilant for people who did not look like they belonged, language that was vague enough to allow for interpretation, but specific enough to encode bias. The training materials included examples of suspicious behavior, and in several of the scenarios, the individuals described were people of color or people who were dressed casually, reinforcing the idea that certain appearances were inherently suspect. Andre called a meeting with the entire leadership team, including the heads of HR, security, facilities, and operations, and he laid out what they had found. "We have a problem," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "We have policies and training materials that are teaching our staff to profile people, to make assumptions based on race and class and appearance, and that has to stop. We're going to rewrite every policy, retrain every employee, and make sure that everyone who walks through our doors is treated with respect, regardless of who they are or why they're here." The response from the leadership team was mixed. Some, like Patricia and David, were fully supportive, saw the need for change and were ready to implement it. Others were more hesitant, worried about the cost, about the time it would take, about the potential backlash from employees who might resist the changes. One executive, the head of security, a white man in his 50s named Greg Mitchell, pushed back directly. "Andre, I understand your concern, but we have security protocols for a reason," Greg said. "We can't just open the doors to anyone who walks in. We have to be able to distinguish between people who have legitimate business here and people who might be a threat." Andre's expression hardened. "And you think the way to do that is to assume that black people and elderly people and people in work clothes are threats? That's not security, Greg. That's discrimination. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe you're not the right person to be leading our security team." Greg's face flushed, and he started to respond, but David cut him off. "Andre's right. We can have security without profiling. We can verify people's identities and reasons for being here without making assumptions based on appearance. And if we can't figure out how to do that, then we're not as smart as we think we are." The conversation continued for another hour, with Andre making it clear that the changes were not optional, that they were going to happen, and that anyone who was not on board with the direction could find employment elsewhere. By the end of the meeting, there was agreement, at least on the surface, that the policies would be revised and the training updated. But implementing the changes was more complicated than Andre had anticipated. The rewritten policies had to be vetted by legal to ensure they did not create new liabilities. The training programs had to be developed, piloted, and rolled out to over 500 employees across multiple locations. And the cultural shift, the deeper work of changing how people thought about service workers and visitors and who deserved respect, was going to take time and sustained effort. In December, Andre decided to make the issue public. He wrote an op-ed for the Boston Globe, titled "When My Grandmother Was Mistaken for the Help, What It Taught Me About Dignity and Respect." In the piece, he recounted what had happened to Evelyn, described the assumptions that had been made, and explained the steps his company was taking to address the problem. He also broadened the conversation, talking about how service workers, cleaning staff, delivery people, and others whose labor made buildings and businesses function were often treated as invisible, as less than, and how that needed to change. The op-ed was published on a Sunday, and by Monday morning it had gone viral. People shared it on social media, commented on it, used it as a springboard for their own stories of being dismissed or disrespected based on assumptions about their class or race or occupation. Several prominent activists and advocates for workers' rights reached out to Andre, praising him for using his platform to highlight the issue and offering to support the work he was doing. But there was also backlash. Some commenters accused Andre of being performative, of using his grandmother's experience to get attention, of virtue signaling rather than making real change. Others questioned whether the incident had even happened the way he described it, suggested that he was exaggerating or misrepresenting what had been a simple misunderstanding. And a few, predictably, argued that service workers should use back entrances, that it was not disrespectful but practical, that Andre was being overly sensitive and trying to turn everything into a race issue. Andre read some of the comments, felt the frustration and the anger, and then made a decision. He was going to do more than just fix the policies at Carter Technologies. He was going to use this moment to start a broader conversation, to push other companies to examine their own practices, to create a movement around the dignity and respect of all workers. He reached out to several other tech CEOs, people he knew from industry conferences and boards, and he proposed the creation of a coalition, a group of companies that would commit to reviewing their policies, training their staff, and ensuring that everyone who entered their buildings was treated with dignity. The response was cautious but positive, and within a few weeks, Andre had commitments from a dozen companies, including some of the largest tech firms in the country, to join the coalition and to implement similar changes. The coalition, which they named the Dignity at Work Initiative, launched in January 2026 with a press conference held at Carter Technologies and attended by CEOs, workers' rights advocates, and media from across the country. Andre spoke about his grandmother's experience, about the need for systemic change, and about the commitment that the member companies were making to do better. Evelyn was there, sitting in the front row, and when Andre acknowledged her and thanked her for her courage in sharing her story, the room erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt the tears well up again, but this time they were tears of pride and hope rather than shame and anger. If you have stayed with this story, if you have seen how one grandmother's humiliation became the catalyst for a movement, if you understand the power of using privilege and platform to demand change, then you know that this is not just about one receptionist or one company. It is about the ways that we value some people's labor and dignity while dismissing others, about the assumptions that shape how we see and treat each other, and about the work it takes to build a more just and equitable world. And if this resonates with you, share it. Let it be part of the conversations you have about respect and humanity in the workplaces and institutions that shape all our lives. The Dignity at Work initiative grew quickly, attracting more companies, more attention, and more scrutiny. The member companies committed to a set of principles: that all visitors and workers would be treated with respect, regardless of their role or appearance, that policies and training would be reviewed for bias, that frontline workers would be included in conversations about how to create welcoming environments, and that progress would be measured and reported publicly. For Carter Technologies, the work was intensive. The company hired an outside consultant, a firm that specialized in equity and inclusion, to conduct an audit of all visitor-facing policies and practices. The consultant, a black woman named Dr. Lorraine Hughes, who had spent decades working on labor rights and workplace dignity, spent 3 months interviewing employees, observing interactions in the lobby and other public areas, and reviewing training materials and incident reports. Her findings, delivered to Andre and the leadership team in March, were sobering. The report documented not just the incident with Evelyn, but a pattern of differential treatment in how visitors were greeted and processed. People of color, older people, and people dressed in work clothes were more likely to be questioned about their purpose, asked to show ID, directed to wait, rather than being sent up immediately. White visitors in business attire, by contrast, were often waved through with minimal screening, their presence assumed to be legitimate. The report also highlighted issues with how the company's cleaning staff and cafeteria workers, most of whom were Black and Latinx, were treated by some employees. Several workers reported being ignored in hallways, spoken to rudely, or treated as invisible. One cleaning worker, a woman named Maria Gonzalez, who had been with the company for 3 years, said in her interview, "I clean the offices every night, and most of the time people don't even look at me. They talk on the phone. They have conversations around me like I'm not there, and if I need to ask them to move so I can clean, sometimes they act annoyed, like I'm bothering them. I'm a person, you know. I have a name, I have a family, but to them, I'm just the cleaning lady." Andre read the report multiple times, feeling the weight of it, the knowledge that his company, the company he had built on values of innovation and integrity, had been failing some of its workers and visitors in fundamental ways. He called an all-hands meeting, a town hall held in the largest conference room with overflow into other spaces via video feed, and he stood in front of his employees and laid out what the audit had found. "I want to start by acknowledging that we have a problem," Andre said, his voice steady but serious. "We have been treating some people who work in and visit this building with less respect and dignity than they deserve. We have policies and practices that encode bias, and we have a culture where some people feel invisible and undervalued. That is unacceptable, and it stops now." He walked through the findings of the report, shared specific examples without naming individuals, and outlined the changes that would be implemented. Revised training for all employees on bias and respect, a new visitor policy that emphasized courtesy and inclusiveness, a recognition program for cleaning and cafeteria staff, and a commitment to listening to feedback from all workers, regardless of their role or position in the company. I also want to say something personal, Andre continued. This work started because of something that happened to my grandmother. She came to visit me, and she was treated like she didn't belong, like she was less than, because of how she looked. And that broke my heart, because she's the person who raised me, who taught me about dignity and respect and treating everyone with kindness. If we're not living those values here, in the company I built, then we're failing. So this is not just about policy changes, this is about culture change. And it starts with each of us, with how we treat the people we encounter every day, whether they're colleagues or visitors or the people who clean our offices and make our food. The response from employees was varied. Many applauded the changes, expressed support for the initiative, and committed to doing better. Some were defensive, felt like they were being accused of something they had not done, worried that the focus on respect and dignity was going to create a culture where everyone was walking on eggshells. And a few pushed back more explicitly, argued that the changes were unnecessary, that Andre was overreacting, that service workers should use service entrances, and that was just how things worked. One employee, a senior engineer named Brad Morrison, stood up during the Q&A portion of the town hall and said, "Andre, I respect what you're trying to do, but I'm concerned that we're spending a lot of time and resources on this issue when we should be focused on building our product and growing the business. I didn't come to work here to attend sensitivity training. I came here to write code and solve problems, and I think a lot of people feel the same way." Andre looked at him, his expression unreadable, and then said, "Brad, I hear you, and I want to be very clear about something. Building a great product and growing the business are important, but they're not the only things that matter. How we treat people matters, the culture we create matters, and if you're not interested in being part of a company that values dignity and respect for all people, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. We're not going to compromise on our values to make you comfortable." The room was silent, the tension thick, and Brad sat down, his face flushed, and did not speak again. But the exchange made clear that the work was going to be difficult, that not everyone was going to embrace the changes willingly, and that there would be resistance and conflict along the way. Over the next several months, the changes were implemented. The visitor policy was rewritten, with an emphasis on greeting everyone warmly, asking open-ended questions about their purpose rather than making assumptions, and treating all visitors as guests regardless of their appearance. The training program was overhauled, with modules on implicit bias, on the history of service work and labor rights, and on the impact of microaggressions and exclusion. And the company launched a recognition program where cleaning staff, cafeteria workers, and other frontline employees were highlighted in company communications, invited to social events, and given opportunities to share their experiences and perspectives. The changes were not without bumps. Some employees complained that the new visitor policy was cumbersome, that it took longer to process people, that it created inefficiencies. A few front desk staff quit, saying they felt like they were being blamed for problems that were not their fault. And there were incidents, like the time a white executive snapped at a cafeteria worker who asked him to bus his own tray, leading to a formal complaint and a conversation with HR. But there were also signs of progress. Employees reported feeling more aware of their behavior, more intentional about how they interacted with people across the company. Cleaning staff and cafeteria workers said they felt more seen, more valued, more like they were part of the community rather than invisible labor. And the lobby, the space where Evelyn had been dismissed and disrespected, began to feel different, more welcoming, with front desk staff who greeted everyone with genuine warmth and curiosity rather than suspicion and judgment. Andre checked in regularly with Evelyn, calling her every few days to update her on the progress, to ask her perspective, to make sure she was okay. Evelyn was proud of what her grandson was doing, but she was also concerned about the toll it was taking on him. The stress and the scrutiny and the constant push and pull of trying to change a culture that was resistant to change. "You're doing good work, baby," she told him one Sunday over dinner at her apartment, the two of them sitting at her small kitchen table eating the greens and cornbread she had made. "But don't let it consume you. You can't fix everything and you can't make everyone happy. You just have to do what's right and trust that it will make a difference." Andre nodded, felt the exhaustion in his bones. "I know, Grandma, but it's hard. Every time we make progress, there's pushback. Every time we implement a change, someone complains. And I keep thinking about what you went through, about how you felt standing in that lobby, and I get angry all over again. I want to make sure that never happens to anyone else." Evelyn reached across the table, took his hand. "It will happen to someone else. Not here, maybe, but somewhere. That's the reality of the world we live in. But what you're doing, the example you're setting, it matters. It's planting seeds. And maybe those seeds will grow, and maybe one day there will be fewer people who have to go through what I went through. That's all we can do, baby. Plant seeds and trust that they'll grow." Andre felt the tears prick at his eyes, felt the love and the wisdom that his grandmother carried, the lessons she had learned from a lifetime of navigating a world that had so often been unkind to her. "I love you, Grandma," he said. "I love you too, baby," Evelyn said. "More than you'll ever know." Glee. In June, 6 months after the incident in the lobby, Carter Technologies held a celebration to mark the progress that had been made and to recognize the people who had contributed to the Dignity at Work initiative. The event was held in the building's atrium, with food and music and speeches from Andre, from Dr. Hughes, who had conducted the audit, and from several employees, including Maria Gonzalez, the cleaning worker who had spoken about feeling invisible. Maria stood at the podium, nervous but determined, and she said in accented English, "When I first started working here, I thought this was just another job, just another place where I would clean and no one would notice me. But this year something changed. People started saying hello, they started learning my name, they started treating me like I matter, and that has meant more to me than I can say. So thank you, Mr. Carter, for caring about people like me. Thank you for seeing us." The room erupted in applause, and Andre felt the emotion rise in his throat, felt the validation of knowing that the work was making a difference, that people's lives were being touched in real and meaningful ways. But he also felt the weight of knowing that this was just the beginning, that the work would need to continue, that vigilance and commitment would be required to sustain the changes and to prevent the culture from sliding back into old patterns. After the event, Evelyn pulled Andre aside and she said, "I'm so proud of you, baby. You took something painful and turned it into something good. That's what I've always tried to teach you. You take the pain and you use it to make the world better." Andre hugged her, held her tight and said, "I learned that from you, Grandma. Everything good in me, I learned from you." The Dignity at Work initiative continued to grow, attracting more companies, more visibility, and more impact. Within a year, over 50 companies had joined the coalition, representing industries from tech to finance to hospitality. The coalition developed resources, best practices, and training programs that member companies could use, and it created a certification program that companies could earn by demonstrating their commitment to the principles and by meeting specific benchmarks related to worker satisfaction and inclusive policies. Andre became a sought-after speaker on the topic, invited to conferences and panels and media appearances to talk about the initiative and the broader issues of worker dignity and equity. He always brought it back to his grandmother, always told the story of what had happened in the lobby, always made it clear that this was personal, that it was about real people and real harm, not just abstract principles. But he also used his platform to amplify the voices of workers, to bring cleaning staff and cafeteria workers and security guards to the stage, to let them tell their own stories and to make visible the labor that kept buildings and businesses running. He funded scholarships for the children of service workers, created pathways for advancement within his own company, and worked with unions and labor organizations to support broader efforts to improve wages and working conditions. 2 years after the incident, Emily Thompson, the receptionist who had dismissed Evelyn, was still with the company. She had completed her performance improvement plan, had undergone extensive training, and had become one of the most vocal advocates for the Dignity at Work initiative within Carter Technologies. She had met with Evelyn multiple times, had apologized again in person, and had shared her own journey of confronting her biases and learning to see people differently. At one of the company's quarterly all-hands meetings, Emily stood up and shared her story. 2 years ago, I made a terrible mistake, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I treated Mrs. Evelyn Carter, Mr. Carter's grandmother, with disrespect and contempt because of assumptions I made about who she was. I told her to use the back entrance. I didn't believe her when she said she was his grandmother, and I'm ashamed of that. But I'm also grateful because that mistake became an opportunity for me to learn, to grow, to understand how my biases were harming people. And I want to say to everyone here, if you think you don't have biases, you're wrong. We all do. The question is whether we're willing to confront them and to change. I was given that chance, and it changed my life. So thank you, Mrs. Carter, for your grace. And thank you, Mr. Carter, for believing that people can learn and do better. Evelyn was in the audience, and when Emily finished, Evelyn stood and said, Emily, thank you for sharing that. It took courage to stand up here and admit what you did and to talk about how you've changed. And I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. Because holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. What helps is when we see each other as human, when we choose to learn and grow, when we decide that we're going to do better. That's what you've done, and I'm proud of you. The room erupted in applause, and Emily was crying, and Evelyn walked over and hugged her, and in that moment there was a sense that something had shifted, that the work they had been doing was not just about policies and training, but about transformation, about healing, about creating a culture where people could make mistakes and learn from them and be better. If you have journeyed with Evelyn and Andre through this story, if you have seen how one incident became a catalyst for change that rippled across an industry, if you understand the power of choosing dignity and respect over convenience and profit, then you know that this work is never finished, that it requires constant effort and vigilance and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And if this story has moved you, if it has inspired you to think about how you treat the people whose labor makes your life possible, then carry it with you. Share it. Let it be part of your commitment to building a more just and humane world. 3 years after the incident, Evelyn was invited to speak at a national conference on labor rights and workplace dignity held in Washington, D.C. She was nervous, had never spoken to such a large audience before, but Andre encouraged her, told her that her story mattered, that people needed to hear from her directly. So she agreed, and she stood on the stage in front of hundreds of people, and she told her story, the story of walking into that lobby and being dismissed and disrespected, the story of the pain and the anger and the decision to speak up rather than stay silent. "I'm 75 years old," Evelyn said, her voice strong and clear despite her age. "I've been cleaning houses, taking care of people, working hard my whole life, and I've been treated like I'm invisible more times than I can count. But when my grandson built his company, when he became successful, I thought maybe things would be different. I thought maybe I would be seen differently. But that day in the lobby I learned that it doesn't matter who your grandson is. It doesn't matter what you've accomplished or how hard you've worked. If people look at you and see a black woman in a floral dress, they make assumptions. They decide you don't belong." She paused, let the words settle, and then continued. "But here's what I want you to know. I didn't speak up for myself. I spoke up for all the people who clean offices and serve food and drive buses and do the work that keeps this country running. I spoke up because every person deserves to be treated with respect, whether they're a CEO or a cleaning lady. And I'm so proud of my grandson for listening, for caring, for using his power to make changes. But I'm also proud of all of you, everyone in this room who is fighting for dignity and respect for workers. That's the work that matters. That's the work that will change the world." The room erupted in a standing ovation, and Evelyn felt the tears streaming down her face, felt the overwhelming love and support from this community of people who understood, who had lived their own versions of her story, who were committed to the same work. And she thought about how far they had come, how much had changed, and how much more work there was still to do. After the conference, Evelyn and André flew back to Boston together, and on the plane, André said, "Grandma, I've been thinking about something. I want to establish a foundation in your name, something that supports service workers, that funds scholarships and training programs and advocacy efforts. I want your legacy to be about more than what happened in that lobby. I want it to be about the change that came after." Evelyn looked at him, felt the pride and the love, and said, "Baby, that's beautiful, but my legacy is you and your mother and your sisters and your cousins. You're what I'm most proud of. The foundation is wonderful, but what matters to me is that you keep doing this work, that you keep standing up for people who can't always stand up for themselves. That's the legacy I want." André nodded, reached for her hand. "I promise, Grandma. I'll keep doing the work. Always." The foundation, named the Evelyn Carter Foundation for Worker Dignity, launched a year later with an initial endowment of $50 million from André and commitments from several other members of the Dignity at Work initiative. The foundation funded scholarships for the children of service workers, grants for organizations working on labor rights and workplace equity, and a fellowship program that brought frontline workers into leadership positions in companies and non-profits. Evelyn served on the board, attended events, and became a visible advocate for the cause. She was interviewed by newspapers and magazines, appeared on podcasts and television shows, and became known as the grandmother who had sparked a movement. She was gracious and humble about the attention, always redirecting the focus to the workers she represented, always emphasizing that the work was bigger than her, bigger than any one person. 5 years after the incident, Carter Technologies was recognized as one of the best places to work in the country, cited for its culture of respect and inclusion, for its innovative policies around worker dignity, and for its commitment to equity. The company had grown to over 5,000 employees, had expanded into new markets and new products, and had maintained its values even as it scaled. André was still CEO, still driven, still committed to the work. But he was also more grounded, more aware of what mattered, more intentional about making time for family and for the people he loved. Every Sunday, he still had dinner with his grandmother, still sat at her kitchen table eating greens and cornbread, still listened to her stories and her wisdom. One Sunday, as they were finishing dinner, Evelyn said, "You know, baby, I've been thinking about that day in the lobby, about how angry I was, how hurt I felt. And I realize now that it was one of the most important days of my life, not because of the pain, but because of what came after. Because it led to all of this, to the foundation and the initiative and the changes you made. It led to people like Maria and Emily having different experiences, and that makes it worth it." André felt the emotion rise, felt the gratitude for this woman who had shaped his life in so many ways. "I'm sorry you had to go through it, Grandma. I'm sorry that it took you being hurt for us to see what needed to change." Evelyn smiled, reached across the table to pat his hand. "That's how change happens, baby. Someone gets hurt, and then someone with power decides to do something about it. That's always been how it works. The question is whether the people with power care enough to act. And you did. That's what matters. They sat together in the quiet of her small apartment, the sounds of the neighborhood filtering in through the windows, and Andre thought about the journey they had been on, about the work that had been done, about the impact that one grandmother's dignity had had on thousands of lives. And he felt grateful, humbled, and more committed than ever to continuing the work, to ensuring that Evelyn's legacy lived on in the culture he built, the policies he implemented, and the world he helped create. 10 years after the incident, Evelyn Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. She had lived to see the Dignity at Work initiative expand to over 200 companies, to see the foundation named in her honor fund scholarships for over 1,000 children, to see the culture shift in ways that made service workers more visible, more valued, more respected. She had lived to see her grandson become not just a billionaire, but a force for good, someone who used his wealth and platform to make the world more just. At her funeral, held at the church she had attended for over 50 years, hundreds of people gathered to honor her memory. Andre gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about the woman who had raised him, who had taught him about dignity and respect and the importance of standing up for what was right. He told the story one more time, the story of the lobby and the receptionist and the assumption that had sparked a movement. And he ended with a promise. My grandmother taught me that every person has value, that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or what they do, Andre said. She taught me that by how she lived, by how she treated everyone she met, with kindness and respect, even when the world did not always treat her the same way. And she taught me that when you see injustice, you don't look away, you do something about it. That's the legacy she leaves behind. And I promise you, Grandma, I will spend the rest of my life honoring that legacy. I will keep fighting for the dignity and respect of all people. I will keep telling your story, and I will make sure that the world knows that you mattered, that your life made a difference, and that the pain you endured became a catalyst for change that touched thousands of lives. The church erupted in applause and tears, and Andre stepped down from the pulpit and sat beside his mother and his sisters and his cousins, and they held each other and grieved and celebrated the life of a remarkable woman who had lived with grace and strength and had left the world better than she found it. And if you have stayed with this story until the end, if you have walked with Evelyn from that moment of humiliation in the lobby to this moment of celebration and remembrance, then you understand that this is not just a story about one grandmother or one grandson or one company. It is a story about the power of dignity, about the work of creating a world where everyone is seen and valued, about the responsibility we all have to challenge assumptions and to treat each other with the respect we all deserve. Carry Evelyn's story with you, share it with others, and let it inspire you to do your own work of building a more just and compassionate world. Because that is how legacies live on, that is how change happens, and that is how we honor the people who came before us and paved the way. The Evelyn Carter Foundation continued to grow and thrive, guided by a board that included Andre, several former service workers who had become advocates and organizers, and representatives from unions and labor rights organizations. The foundation expanded its programs, created new initiatives, and became a leading voice in the movement for worker dignity and equity. One of the foundation's signature programs was the Evelyn Carter Fellowship, which brought frontline workers into year-long placements at major corporations, where they worked alongside executives and provided insights into how policies and practices affected people at all levels of the organization. The fellows were paid living wages, given professional development opportunities, and treated as valued members of the leadership team. Many fellows went on to permanent positions in the companies where they had been placed, and several became executives themselves, bringing their lived experiences into boardrooms and C-suites. The foundation also funded research on workplace dignity, partnering with universities and think tanks to study the impact of respectful treatment on worker satisfaction, productivity, and well-being. The research showed what Evelyn had always known intuitively, that when people felt valued and respected, they performed better, stayed longer, and contributed more. The findings were used to advocate for policy changes at the local, state, and federal level, and several states passed legislation requiring companies to implement anti-discrimination training and to ensure that all workers, regardless of role, were treated with dignity. Andre continued to lead Carter Technologies, but he also devoted more of his time to the foundation and to advocacy work. He served on the board of several labor rights organizations, testified before Congress on issues related to worker protections, and used his platform to amplify the voices of people whose stories were often ignored or dismissed. He thought about his grandmother every day, remembered her wisdom and her strength, and tried to live in a way that would make her proud. He established an annual award in her name, given to individuals or organizations that exemplified the values of dignity and respect in their work. The award came with a significant financial prize, and it quickly became one of the most prestigious recognitions in the field of labor rights. 20 years after the incident in the lobby, Andre stood in the same building where his grandmother had been dismissed and disrespected, and he looked around at what had been built. The lobby had been redesigned, with art and seating areas, and a plaque that read, "In memory of Evelyn Carter, who taught us that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The reception desk was staffed by people who had been trained not just in security protocols, but in hospitality and inclusion, who greeted every visitor with genuine warmth, who asked questions with curiosity rather than suspicion. The building itself had become a model for other companies, with policies and practices that centered worker dignity, with regular surveys and feedback mechanisms that ensured that people at all levels felt heard and valued. The cleaning staff and cafeteria workers were represented on the company's culture committee, had input into decisions that affected their work, and were celebrated as essential members of the Carter Technologies community. Andre walked through the lobby, past the plaque with his grandmother's name, and he felt the presence of her spirit, the sense that she was still with him, still guiding him, still reminding him of what mattered. He thought about the journey they had been on together, about the pain and the anger and the transformation that had followed, and he felt grateful for every moment, every lesson, every opportunity to make the world a little bit better. And as he rode the elevator to the 14th floor, to the office where he had held his grandmother while she cried and had promised her that he would make things right, Andre Carter felt a deep sense of peace. He had kept his promise. He had done the work. And his grandmother's legacy lived on, in the foundation that bore her name, in the policies that protected workers' dignity, in the culture that valued respect over convenience, and in the countless lives that had been touched by her story. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. But it was good work, important work, and Andre was committed to continuing it for the rest of his life, in honor of the woman who had raised him, who had loved him, and who had shown him what it meant to live with dignity and to fight for justice. And if you have read this story and felt the power of Evelyn's legacy, if you have been inspired by the changes that one moment of injustice sparked, if you understand that each of us has the power to create change in our own spheres of influence, then take that inspiration and act on it. Treat the people whose labor makes your life possible with the respect they deserve. Challenge assumptions when you see them. Stand up for dignity and justice in the spaces you occupy. Because that is how we build a better world, one interaction at a time, one policy at a time, one person at a time. That is Evelyn Carter's legacy, and it is ours to carry forward.